Hey, it's the end of 2025 and things are getting real. What actually changes when you bring agents into a business? How do teams need to be set up? And what do HR and business leaders need to get right? We'll talk about all that. So let's jump right in. Welcome to What's the Buzz, where leaders share how they have turned hype into outcome. Today, we'll talk about how to design your workforce for agentic AI. And who better to talk about it than someone who's actively working in this space? Todd Raphael. Todd, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Hey, Todd, maybe not everybody in the audience is familiar with you or has come across your content. I certainly have, and I've been a big fan of the things that you put out for a long time. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do?
No problem. I spent a couple decades, well, more than a couple decades at a couple organizations, Cranes, and then ERE on conferences and publications for recruiters, HR professionals, and others. And then went to a HR technology company called Eightfold fairly early on and helped grow that marketing department, grow the organization dramatically over 3 years. And then was recruited to go to a competing organization called Skyhive, which sold to Cornerstone On Demand about a couple years ago. And I've been working as helping HR tech companies, talent acquisition technology companies, and related companies, staffing companies, and so on, over the last couple of years, help figure out how to differentiate themselves, how to communicate what they do, how to explain what they do, communicate, create content, work with influencers, and that kind of thing. Help them figure themselves out and how to find themselves and communicate who they are.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. You know, I feel a lot of times marketing gets a bit of a bad reputation, and I've previously been in marketing myself in my career, but I feel you also, get a very good grasp on what's actually happening in the market. What are different vendors doing? What do buyers actually look for? Which is why I'm so excited to have you on the show and learn from your perspective as well. What are you seeing? So folks, if you're in the audience and you're just joining us, also drop a comment in the chat where you're joining us from. I'm always curious to see how global our audience is. And if you want to learn how you can bring AI into your business and turn hype into outcome, check out my book, The AI Leadership Handbook, for some tangible advice. So, Todd, like I said, it's the end of 2025. It feels like we've talked about AI agents as an industry for, I don't know, a year or so. It feels like it's already been a decade in AI years. And it feels like now we're really at this point where I see more and more organizations, more and more leaders, more and more HR leaders also come to the table and say, well, what do we do? Right? We're spinning up individual proofs of concepts and pilots, and we're working with different vendors to try things out. And I think that's great, right? Finally, we're moving towards action. But when I talk to leaders, when I attend vendor conferences, and it's probably similar for you as well, it seems that everybody just talks about the building part of agents, but there's not a lot of talk about what actually happens afterward. What happens when you bring them to the organization? What happens when they are in production? So I'm curious, with all this talk about ditch your human employees, get agentic employees, do we now need to draw parallels to how we manage humans as well? Can we apply some of that to agents? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I've been to a bunch of conferences this last couple of years, and including 2 recently, and there was all kinds of booths having to do with agents and buying agents. And one of them, you get to build your own agents right at the booth there on a little iPad, and then after 5 minutes, you're done. You got your agent. But yeah, there was not a whole lot of explanation exactly like, what does your day look like? Like, what is it? How does this agent kind of work in your workflow? Like, you get up, you have a job, you find out there's someone quit, so you have an open job. How do you fill that job using an agent? What do you do? Like step A, step B, step C, step D, and E. Like, where's the agent fitting in, and what do they do and what do they not do? Right. And then once that agent is part of your workflow, your hiring process, what then do you do? How do you know in 6 months if it's biased? Or how do you know if it's accurate? It may be perfectly fair, but not very accurate. It may be not really maybe not be an improvement over how things were without an agent, or maybe there's some personalization with the agent that's no longer working very effectively or something. But so those are, I think, open questions, but certainly there's not a lot of information exactly about how do you kind of spend a day or spend a week or a month with agents. How does that work in your life, your work life, your job?
Yeah, I mean, I've been creating some courses with LinkedIn Learning on the topic, what happens when you bring agents to business, and some of them came out at the end of last year, so even very, very early in that wave. But I'm sure things have been evolving, and especially as you in your businesses are thinking about this too. Right? My recommendation would be, hey, think about how do we use these things once they're in our business in that sense. And I feel with all that focus on building, to your point, there's not enough conversation about what happens afterwards.
Yeah.
And that opens many parallels in my point of view to how do we work with people, right? We want to make sure that depending on the role or the company, that we run background checks. Are you who you say you are? Permissions for your role, you get certain permissions to certain systems, but not more extensive than what you really need to. Guidelines, codes of conduct. I want you to behave in a certain way. Right? I'm thinking about what if technology teams build agents in every different department, or every user builds it slightly differently. Do we need to ground them in some sort of code of conduct, for example? What do you think?
I think that there's this idea that, so a lot of companies I work with are working on talent intelligence or skills intelligence, and they're taking AI and they're taking jobs and trying to figure out what tasks and skills are involved in each job. That by breaking a job up into tasks and skills, you can help predict the future. You can say, oh, well, this job, half of it may no longer be necessary to be done by a human, or these two jobs could be melded together in the future. So that's good. That's like a great, interesting, and useful thing. However, the one thing that I think is missing is a lot of things that humans do don't really show up on a job description, on a list of tasks. They're not always even apparent. I've had the experience, and I'm sure most of our listeners have had this experience. I'm sure you have had it, where someone leaves and you don't realize what they were doing until they're gone. One recent company I worked at eliminated about 35% of the people there. And there was a lot of chatter among those of us who were remaining, where we would say to each other, like, do they know what some of these people were doing? And over the subsequent weeks, we found out, no, the company was shocked to find out each time something would happen, it was a task done or something done by someone who was no longer there. Why is that happening? Well, because it's very abstract, it's very intangible. A customer likes an employee a lot who's the customer service person, doesn't really show up anywhere. A customer hears, Andreas or Todd on a podcast, or a prospective customer hears Andreas or Todd on a podcast and becomes a customer. That happened to me at Eightfold. Someone from the military, the Army, heard me on a webinar, contacted me. I got them in touch with sales folks, and Eightfold ended up getting this big thing called a Gig Eagle, this big contract for Army reservists, technology that helps find work for Army reservists. So these are things that are like not always on a list of a job description or a list of tasks, and they're just these kind of intangible things that happen over time, where someone kind of takes on things that are human to human relationships that are very, very hard to quantify. So I would think that's a very, very important thing to consider as you're kind of breaking down jobs and people into tasks and roles using AI.
I think that's a really, really important reminder, right? In this climate, when you see layoffs, restructuring left and right in many different industries, certainly tech is leading from what I'm seeing. You do get the feeling that it's numbers on a balance sheet in some cases, right? But there's a lot more, to your point, than the sum of tasks or line items in a job description, right? Bob and Jane and Sarah do a lot more than these 5 or 10 bullets here. So
I mean, think about like someone getting their hair done. Could a robot eventually get someone's haircut? I'm sure. Is that really why someone gets their hair done? Probably not. They do it to talk, to gossip, to pour out their feelings, whatever. Some senior citizens get their hair done every week or every 3 weeks or whatever to get out of a senior citizen home and take a little field trip. It's something they look forward to. So in that example, it's unlikely that that's on the job description of the person.
Yes.
There are many other jobs that the human contact is much less important. But anyhow.
So a couple of weeks I was on a podcast hosted by a CEO or successful CEO of mid-sized business, and we were talking about agents as well. And I said, well, we're looking at this right now in business a lot of times as a cost exercise. Can I take out cost? Move out people. We no longer need them. We have agents that can do the work. But what I feel we're missing a lot of times is actually this enablement, this multiplication type aspect. What if we had the same amount of people, but with the help of technology, they became more productive or more efficient, or they had 10 times better insights and could help us grow the business faster, right?
Yeah.
Because they know our industry, they know our customers, they know our products. Why is nobody thinking about that? And the answer that I got really surprised me, because he said, well, if I don't need more people, why should I hire them? I don't hire more than I need. And I said, that's not the point, right? The point is you have people in your business, you've already invested in them. So why not give them better tools and better technology to help them be more successful and help your company be more successful?
Right.
That still baffles me, that that a lot of times this is the prevailing mindset. Take out
Well
cost.
said. Yeah, well said. Yeah.
Now, we've already talked about a few gaps, I would say, in this vision of agents that we see right now. Another one that I'm seeing is, hey, there's not really an org chart, right? If we do compare agents and humans, or digital workers and human workers, in our human world, we have an org chart. We know who reports to whom. We know what the roles, what the job functions are. We know what the job descriptions are. And yes, there are even more tasks between the lines that employees do. But for agents, in theory, anyone can spin up their agent or their team of agent. So what do you feel the org chart looks like or is going to look like as organizations bring more agents into their business?
Short answer, I don't know. As Peter Capelli, a USC professor I talked to recently, reminded me every prediction about business is almost always wrong because people you just don't know what's going to happen in the future. He gave an example of when people predicted that truck drivers would be obsolete, and we've already passed the date. But if I had to predict, which I will, when we think about an org chart, we think about like most of us would visualize boxes and lines. And it's like a pyramid. It's like a hierarchy. And I don't know if that hierarchy really is going to make sense anymore, because what we're hearing or what's been talked about is that in this new AI world, people's knowledge, their experience, their insight, their connections, those 4 things I think I listed, those are going to be super important. In the current or old world, it was, how many people do you manage? If you manage some people, you can get a raise, and then you can manage some people with a higher title, and then you can maybe manage some more people with a lofty title, and then you get another raise or something like that. And somehow you're more important because you've managed people. But what I'm hearing and reading is your importance is partly going to be based on your knowledge, your experience, your network, your connections, your understanding of an industry and the company. That kind of stuff is not necessarily about how many people you manage and with what titles, which tells me that maybe the hierarchical boxes with lines org chart maybe will not be as valuable. Maybe it'll be more like a sports team or something, where like the manager, the coach, and the dugout, the sidelines in the case of basketball or football, is not necessarily the most high paid or not necessarily the most famous or the most valuable. It's the individual contributors, the players, with their skills and their knowledge or whatever. In the case of sports, I guess it would be skills, but case of corporate life, it might be your knowledge and your connections. That might make you more valuable than, say, a manager, perhaps.
So a couple different thoughts there. In things running through my mind as I'm listening to you say this. And one is I wonder, how do you acquire that knowledge when when you as an individual maybe do a bit more of that cognitive offloading, relying on AI more and more, or maybe a little too much. How do you gain experience? How do you become more experienced in your role? And eventually, even if it's a flatter hierarchy, how do you have opportunities and get opportunities to advance when you work with AI as a co-thinker or as a co-pilot in that sense? That's one. There are a couple more, but
I mean, I imagine it might depend on the industry. If you were an expert in medicine or restaurants or retail or whatever it might be, and you came from some background, whether as a nurse or a physician or a consultant or a retail store manager, and then you took on a job at some company, your background might vary, but the key here is that you have a network, you have connections, you have knowledge, you have expertise, you understand the field, the challenges of it, and that kind of stuff. It's not so much that you're coming to the company to manage a certain number of people with a certain title or anything like that. It's kind of what's in your head that's harder to offload to a computer.
So basically what I think I'm hearing, despite all of that technological support at our fingertips and at our availability, prioritize the human connection, prioritize the real world experiences, because you can take those from task to task, from job to job, and eventually from company to company too, right? That's what makes you valuable, your knowledge, your unique combination of skills and network.
Well said again, yeah.
So one thing I'm wondering too, right? I used to be a manager. At one point, I was managing managers who are managing teams. And when I read about flatter hierarchies, I put myself back into those shoes from a couple of years ago, and I'd be pretty afraid. Like, hey, I've worked so hard to, claw my way up the org chart and the hierarchy to get to this position, mid-level, senior level leadership. And now you're telling me the company no longer needs me because there are fewer people that manage more agents. Where is that going? Especially when we talk about org chart and flatter hierarchies. Is that the reality that you see that leaders need to warm up to or get more comfortable with?
Yes, I feel that when I see a lot of people out there who are valuable because of their connections. They're valuable because on social media or on the media or otherwise they can have an influence. I see a lot of individual contributors with a lot of powerful value that maybe is going getting hidden because they're not managing 14 people. They don't have a lofty title or whatever. But it's those super connectors or those super knowledge folks or those kind of people who are hidden connectors, hidden sources of knowledge, hidden sources of institutional knowledge for an organization, who are so often kind of underused, underpaid, and underappreciated.
So it sounds like we need to shift again to impact as opposed to just being there and doing the work that you're assigned. But what is the impact you're actually having? Who are you influencing? What are you influencing? More on that side, when agents can take over some of the tasks that we've been doing. Is that kind of?
And so often it's off the radar screen. I got a note, I'd say it was a few months ago, from someone at Eightfold asking me a bunch of questions about some work that I was doing there that they were now assigned to. I haven't been there in since 2022. I left to go to Skyhive. I've been there in 3 years, and no one knew that I was doing this work that I had taken on in my own interest. And that's a very tangible example, but there's a lot of relationships and other kinds of things that just fly under the radar. that are very, very hard to quantify and put your finger on,
right,
till someone leaves. Yeah.
Reminds me of some of the things that I remember when I was in corporate, things that I've done or that I had done 10 years ago or put in place or in practice were still being used by the time I was leaving, with little updates or a little maintenance, even though other people were taking it over. So you see that all the time. It's a good point. Yeah.
Just reminded of this story, and if you've been to like a lot of human resources and talent and workforce conferences, you've heard this story, and it's probably getting really old. And if you haven't been, it's probably kind of interesting. But so I've heard this story a few times. But Disney, the company, did this study where they were trying to figure out. They decided they could only put so much eggs in one basket as far as like hiring and managing people. They can't, like, not every single person in the company is the most important person in the company by definition. So they set out to try to figure out what are the most important jobs in this company that we really need to focus on, where a slightly better employee is going to be so much different than a slightly worse employee, as opposed to just, it doesn't make a ton of difference if someone's a little better or worse at something. And is it the animators? Is it the people who check safety on amusement park rides? Is it an actor? Although I guess that was a bad example because the safety checkers are probably important. Who can deny that? But anyhow, they came out with the people at Disneyland or Disney World who are dressed as Mickey Mouse or Goofy or something and the reason they came out with that being the most important job is that those people are the ones who are most often asked, where's the bathroom? Where's the shortest line? Where's when's the sun going to go down on this ride? It's too hot, or, we're going to get a water fountain. And like that customer experience is like super hugely everything. It's like going to make or break someone's stay, the bathroom, the lines, the water. But yet the people's job is to dress up as Mickey and run around, do whatever you do as Mickey. So a really powerful example of how these things are kind of intangible and kind of offshoots of our regular day jobs.
That's a great example. So I guess I haven't been to enough HR conferences yet.
I've been to too many.
My assumption was, it's the experience. You wouldn't want to have Mickey or Pluto or any of the other characters be in a bad mood. That's why it's important. But certainly the tangible things, where can I get water or things matter. Absolutely. Now, to me, it feels like the industry has, to stick with the ride in an amusement park example, right? Shot through the roller coaster of the AI hype and the agentic AI hype, and we've quickly accelerated to get to the peak, where I think we're right now, just before the peak over the last 12 months or so. But I also see a lot of the conversation is actually driven by technologists, right? You have vendors that whisper in your CIO's ear, hey, come build here, build on my platform, or we've built something into our applications that you can use. But a lot of times who I'm missing and who I feel is not part of those conversations is actually HR leaders, right? So I think as an HR leader, you don't just need to be in the building, you need to actually have a seat at the table when these conversations are taking place. How do you recommend HR leaders get involved when it's a lot of times the IT or technology department leading these agentic AI initiatives? What do HR leaders need to do?
I mean, for one thing, in the future, these may become one and the same, as has been talked about. You're managing work. You're not managing people. You're not managing computers. You're managing work. And so it might be that in some companies, IT and HR kind of become highly intertwined. You're managing work, whether a person does it or whether a computer does it or whether a combination of a person or a computer does it. So I guess one answer to your question would be there may not be this distinction at some point in the future. Right. But ultimately, I think that human resources people may be able to see the big picture better than some other people, because they might be able to see the entire life cycle of a person. Say if we use AI in this part of the process, like let's say that we are using artificial intelligence to hire people better based on their skills, not based on where they went to college or whether they even went to college. Let's say that they're going to try to do that and use AI to find skilled people who maybe didn't go to college or did, but but make sure they particularly don't ignore those who didn't go to college. So if that's what is going on, the HR folks might be the ones who best understand how to look at the entire employee life cycle and say, okay, what kind of skills do we need, not just for hiring, but like once these people are on the staff, how might people be upskilled or reskilled? How do we keep these people from leaving? How do we, design an organization that make people really engaged and motivated? Because it's kind of a two-way street. You can find the best employee ever, and they just are going to lose interest if it's a poor environment. So like, there's all kinds of aspects to the workplace that from soup to nuts, from start to finish, from identifying a candidate to the time they're interviewed, assessed, selected, hired, motivated, stay, managed, skilled, reskilled, moved into other jobs, take on gigs, taking on mentors in-house, learning from a coach in-house. There's so many parts of that perhaps human resources folks are well situated to see that big picture. And they also are probably a bit of a long-winded answer, but they also are probably well situated to have data that show some of these things. So they might be able to show how recruiting connects to retention. They might be able to go, hey, look, our data show that if you hire this person that you're saying is great, that person is likely to leave in 2.5 months. So let's hire someone who would be a great employee, meaning they're going to be great and want to stay. So they might have that kind of data that someone else might not have at their disposal, because again, they might have a lot of workforce related insights from their technology.
Fantastic. That ties it together so nicely, especially mentioning all the different functions and processes that HR supports, all of them being critical, from hire to retire and talent development and succession planning and everything. Wonderful. Todd, I've really been looking forward to our conversation. I've been looking for someone to have a conversation like this with in the HR space for quite some time. And it's been a real challenge finding people who are knowledgeable, who have a perspective on this. So I'm super excited that we got to chat today.
Me too.
Before we close it, I was wondering if you can summarize the key 3 takeaways for our audience from today. We covered a lot of ground over the last 25 minutes. What would you say are the key 3 things that our audience members should know?
Learn more about your people and what these true human qualities that they have are, not sort of vagaries like empathy, but what truly are they doing for customers or for bringing in customers or other things that could be related to technology? What is it they're doing that's maybe not apparent or not kind of on the stat sheet on their job description or something? Like, really learn deeply about your people best you can. Use technology to help plan for the future, to see what can computers do in the future, what can people do in the future, how might we plan our workforce around that? Some jobs may be combined with other jobs. Some jobs may be partially automated. How will that change the job once it's partially automated? So that is number 2, to use your workforce planning to think about the relationship between how AI is going to affect computers and people in the future. And then I'm thinking on the spot here, but no, so bear with me. But number 3 is just the two-way street, really, that really the employee life cycle being not just something that you can't take a sliver and say, we're going to now hire people based on their based on skills, not based on their pedigree. You need to look at the entire employee life cycle: hiring, learning, retention, turnover, reskilling, mentors, internal talent marketplaces, so people taking on gigs internally. Look at that entire marketplace and think about all of how AI can holistically change and improve everything you do from soup to nuts with employees.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Todd. Thanks for joining and for sharing your expertise with us. Like I said, it was a real pleasure having you on and learning from you, especially as this space is so nascent and emerging, yet moving so quickly. So really appreciate having you on today.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Folks, for those of you in the audience, thank you so much for watching and listening to us, and see you next time for another episode of What's the Buzz. Bye-bye.